Assalamu alaikum everyone. Jazakallah khair for joining us for another episode of Where Muslim Presents. What we're going to be talking about this time is the infamous, at this point, travel ban, the Muslim ban that Donald Trump has placed on 7 countries, like citizens of 7 countries being able to travel to the United States. The countries are Iran, Libya, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Somalia, and Sudan. He's named them in an executive order. We all know about this. Basically, just to be clear, these are people who have been vetted for immigration or for visit. They are, sometimes in many cases green card holders, or even for Canadians specifically, Nexus card holders. That's where you have easy access to go into the States. And some Nexus card holders have also been stopped just because I believe they had a Syrian passport or something of that sort. And so, really, I think as we're talking about the Muslim ban, it raises a series of questions. And I guess the first controversy that I want to address with you, Malik, is there's a lot of people that are arguing that because it's only 7 countries out of like a total of 52, is this really a Muslim ban? What's your take on that?
Yeah, it's not clear on this. It's a good sort of use case of how like the right wing internal and in terms of how people who want to defend such kind of racist kind of policies, they kind of fall back on. Well, it doesn't literally say that this is against black people. We've seen this with the Southern Strategy, for example, which we've talked a lot about on the show, where for example they refer to what they call dog whistle politics, right? So
sure.
for example, what they talk about is they say that they're going to talk about states' rights, right? And
sure.
instead of or law and order, but these are all code words to actually mean black people, right?
For sure.
And also the way that segregationists in America worked with didn't specifically in the letter of the law, ban black people per se, right?
Sure.
It they used a kind of literacy tests and other types of things to block black people from getting the equal rights to white people, right?
Yeah, for sure, absolutely.
And so the Muslim ban is no different. I mean, we have here the president-elect declaring his intention to ban Muslims, and then the first thing he does is go after 7 majority Muslim countries, and we don't just have that. And what we're going to show just after this is how Rudy Giuliani lays out how he worked with Trump to make the Muslim ban legal.
So when he first announced it, he said Muslim ban. He called me up. He said, put a commission together. Show me the right way to do it legally. I put a commission together with Judge Mukasey, with Congressman McCall, Pete King, a whole group of other very expert lawyers on this. And what we did was we focused on, instead of religion, danger.
Don't you find that hilarious, that clip? I mean, why? It's interesting that he would just go out there and say the most revealing information on a Fox News interview. Rudy Giuliani continues to amaze and surprise me.
And it's an important point as where Muslims that we need to look into things. It's like when you look at and you do research in these types of things. Like for example, as Muslims, a lot of Muslims may not be aware of the Southern Strategy, but it's something that's quite out there. If you Google Lee Atwater and Southern Strategy, you'll find a video of him explaining the Southern Strategy. And we were lucky with this time with Giuliani coming straight up and telling us, mapping it out for the. I think you were saying that before when we were preparing for the show that they're going to use this as part of the evidence against Trump as a.
So they already have. It's really interesting. And they in the court cases, because currently, just to be clear, the legal status of the ban is that it is not enforceable currently because the courts have overruled it. And the reason they've given the evidence that the prosecution in that case, who were prosecuting the executive order, was that Donald Trump has said he wanted to ban Muslims again and again when he was running for his election campaign, and then they used the Rudy Giuliani clip, and when they put those two things together, it was clear that there was an intent to discriminate, which was a core part of their case. Absolutely. And so anyone who looks at something like that, like I was watching the Rubin Report, and I forget what the first name was, Mr. Rubin. Was making this impassioned argument about how people haven't even read the law. It doesn't say the word Muslim on it once. There's so many other countries that aren't. And it's the Arizona Papers, Please bill, I don't know if you guys remember that, where the law basically said that police in Arizona have the right to question the immigration of anybody who looks illegal. It never actually said Mexican. It never actually said brown-skinned people. In fact, the law even said it's not allowed to discriminate based on color. but it threw in language like looks illegal, and it was clear what that was supposed to do. Like, who looks illegal? You know, someone eating a taco, maybe. You know what I mean? Someone who uses, you know, maybe different language. It comes from a
Spanish
dominant culture with taco trucks in every corner. Like, you know, what was it? Like, what was the what makes you look illegal? And so it's the same thing with the Muslim ban. Like, yes, it's not a full Muslim ban, and yes, it's not every country, but at the end of the day, he promised a Muslim ban, and he wants to deliver to a group of people who hate Muslims. And that's why, you know, you see the beginnings of something like that happening. I don't know if you have some other analysis as to why it's not the entire 52 countries and only the 7.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that they got the list of 7 from the previous administration for other reasons. However, there was no indication from the previous administration that we're going to block legitimate Visa card holders and the like. And I think it's part of Trump's new America, where they're going to go after you know, the minorities they said they were going to go after, and they're going after Muslims. They're also ramping it up against you know, other illegal people, some from Mexico and the other Latin American, South American countries as well.
Sure.
So I mean, we can talk about that on a later show, but Trump is, you know, making his you know, is working to implement what he promised to implement in his election.
For sure. I think what's kind of interesting about it is, I mean, if you look at a lot of these countries, you look at these countries that have been included in this list. Many of these countries are countries that have been sanctioned, or in many cases just straight up bombed by the Americans, like destroyed. Iraq. To put Iraq on this list, Iraq, a country that at first in the 90s and then in 2003 was obliterated by American force, and now you have people from that country that might want to leave, that might want a better life because their country was destroyed by the Americans, and for them to say, no, now you're not allowed to come to our country even though we blew up yours. There's a cruelty there that I think needs to be talked about.
Absolutely, and it speaks to the larger question of colonialism, right, and how America invades other countries or supports brutal dictators in those countries, especially the Muslim world, and how they, you know, see the Muslims, right, and you know, it's the only value that, you know, that those people have is in terms of what the kind of resources or labor they can exploit from there, right? Like, we know how Walmart exploits the labor indirectly, and I'm sure they have a lot of risk management and compliance people in the way to make sure it's not directly them, but it's you know, they exploit the labor of Muslims in Bangladesh, right? And
through contractors.
In the end, that's what I mean by risk management, right? So they don't actually. They're not directly dealing with the people, and Apple does something similar with Chinese workers, right?
With Foxconn, yeah.
Foxconn, yeah. So I mean, it speaks to that colonial sort of apparatus where, you know, you can just keep the sort of what Rudyard Kipling called half devil, half child back in the sort of the colonies, and then, you know, the sort of the main province or the capital, if you will, is free of those undesirables.
Was that in White Man's Burden, by the way, that Rudyard Kipling said that?
Yeah, it was White Man's Burden.
I think that should be essential reading for anyone who's trying to understand how America relates to the rest of the world, Europe as a whole, really. And yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to that, like, that essentialism of it, where you destroy a people, but then you attribute their response to your destruction as something fundamentally wrong with them, right?
Right.
It's like, oh, you come from an unstable country. Who knows why that is? You know, maybe you guys just don't know how to run a country. Completely ignoring the fact that you bombed their country, and that's a huge reason why it's unstable.
Well, and that's what I think is it. You know, in terms of, you know, when you read what Trump sort of said, we have to figure out what's going on there, and, you know, he was responsible for a raid which an 8-year-old girl, innocent girl, was killed, and she was shot in the neck and she bled out. I mean, that's what's happening.
You're talking about the Yemen raid, right?
Yeah, the Yemen raid. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what's going on there, right? Like, I mean, how would that family feel about America, and, you know, how would they feel about that, right? Of course, we don't, you know, endorse violence and that type of thing, but to say that we don't know what's going on there is unacceptable. Right?
Intellectually dishonest and cruel, fundamentally cruel, right?
Absolutely, right? That, you know, I mean, you know, Donald Trump has a daughter, and you could just imagine how he would feel about her bleeding out 8 years old, right? We're all human, and we have to empathize, right? And it's just, you know, this lens that they look at Muslims as, you know, and people in South America and the whole world is like as we discussed, is the colonial lens that they've always kind of looked through the world, and that's not going to work for the long term.
I think it's interesting that Donald Trump also has a son who's quite young, and when he was attacked by a comedian, did some really insensitive joke, a lot of people, including him, expressed outrage over this because how do you blame a child for disagreements you may have with his father?
Right.
How does the case of Nawar Lalaki change? The girl who was shot in the neck and bled out for 2 hours before she passed on.
What I think is heartwarming, though, however, is and kind of is important is that the people have stood up against this ban, and we've seen the protests at the airports, and it's really good to see that people stand up for Muslims in spite of that propaganda that we see out there. You and I joke about how vampires, probably people would rather hang out with a vampire than a Muslim, right? Because whether it's Vampire Diaries or whatever vampire movie is in vogue these days, right?
I think we need to sparkle when hit by sunlight.
Exactly.
I think that's a good PR campaign for Muslims. Make us sparkle.
Absolutely, right? So it's as Muslims, we despite this propaganda, people are standing up for Muslims and generally appreciate it, and as we know from the practice of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, he always recognized the non-Muslims who helped him. So, for example, when there was the boycott was going on with the Muslims, where they were effectively what we call today put in a concentration camp by the elite tribe of the Quraysh. There were some who got that boycott ended, and they were non-Muslims, and he made sure that that they were protected later on from in terms of gratitude to for their help during that time.
So he gave them some specific honor for having done something, even though they didn't share a belief system.
Yeah, correct. And so so when we look at the non-Muslims standing up in light of because when you kind of read about how brutal the American regime can be, it's not easy to stand up, right? So white privilege will only go so far.
Yeah,
and it's not just. I mean, of course, I don't mean it's just white people standing up, but but what I'm saying is that it's commendable that people have the integrity to stand up.
Absolutely. We always embrace that. I guess an interesting point here, just a twist on this. I mean, there's a lot of companies that have spoken out against Trump's ban as well. What do you make of that? Like Uber, that was kind of called into question, but then had kind of stood up to it when it came to its own workers. You had some other companies going out against it as well. Lyft tried to, I think they gave $1 million to the ACLU. They promised over the next 4 years. What do you think of this corporate activism?
So again, it's good that people are standing up because it's easy to get behind the government and just kind of follow their orders, right? So on the one hand, I do recognize them just as the way I recognize the protesters. However, I think it's important to kind of highlight one sort of issue. And when I was going through Wall Street Journal and I listened to it through my Audible subscription, and they had two stories to kind of juxtaposition with each other. They had one was the Muslim ban and about how the tech companies are standing up and they're going to fight this. And then they had, right before that story, they had a story about like how America is outsourcing like it never has outsourced before, right? And they talked about how to like 20 to 50% of companies outsource, and how the main driver is cost savings, and what ends up happening is worker insecurity, right? And the reason why I found that this juxtaposition very interesting is that because what it shows is that how it really highlights how the human being, its sole value to the capitalist system is their economic output, right?
Sure.
And that and this is a structural thing. I'm not looking at a specific person or anything like that, but just the overall structure of the capitalist system is all about maximizing profits for the corporations, right? And so therefore the way to thrive in that kind of concept, and the way that the Muslim ban sort of got addressed by the society directly by the people who could actually afford to, was because that they had a vested interest in terms of saying, hey, like this type of ban can affect the way we make money through to getting workers out of Iran or any of these 7 countries. Sure. And also it also can potentially affect in general, because once you start going after these countries, well, what about India, right? Yeah. Which is, I'm sure the Trump supporters don't know the difference. They don't realize that India is not a Muslim country, right? Or the difference between Sikhs, Hindus, and Muslims, right? Sure. Because racists, as they've killed Sikh people before, right?
Much to the chagrin of Sikh people, actually, I was going to say, poor guys have to bear the brunt of, well, nothing we've done either, but still.
Absolutely, and I think that I think that the politically aware amongst the Sikh and the Hindu communities kind of realize that they will be treated as Muslims are, right? And that's what's going to happen is that, and in fact, the Wall Street Journal was reporting today how companies are backing away from outsourcing to India, right? So I think that they realize that this is a slippery slope, that it's going to affect the way that they manage their employee structure big time, and I think that this is one of the flaws, one deep structural flaws of capitalism, where they only see people in terms of their economic value. And I think that's an important kind of point that we have to note, that though the individual people who are activists and the people within the companies, that's great that they're doing this. However, the thing that we have to see is that that this is not a humane system in its core, right? Sure. It's that, like, for example, when we look at Islam doesn't just recognize people, for a specific value, right? Like, Islam recognizes people's humanity, and like when we, for example, in the Quran, in Surah 80, in chapter 80, Surah Abasa, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, he advises the Prophet, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that to pay attention to the blind man, even though that he was talking to the elites, and the Islam and the elites would have been a great benefit to the ummah in terms of protecting, like we talked about, like the boycott and the other kind of torture and, sure, and murder that they were going through at the time, and yet the sort of the fact that he was blind, and that his what we would look on a sort of superficial level is that his value is less from an economic point of view. But still, like, his taqwa, or his, as we know in Islam, that what really measures a person is their consciousness, right?
The consciousness of
and
their
humanity,
spiritual reality, yeah.
And their humanity as well, like in the sense that even non-Muslims, for example, their humanity is recognized. That, for example, that when we look at sort of the basic rights of man about having access to food, shelter, and clothing, according to the hadith, saying the Prophet, it's the son of Adam. Any human being he has no better right for 1, 2, 3, 4, meaning that human beings, just by being human, should be honored, right? Just for being human. And I think that this the way that the ban was dealt with, the only way to deal with it in terms of the structures that are out there, is through the economic structures, and it shows a deep flaw in the system itself.
So I guess the argument you're making is that the capitalist corporations were forced to make an economic argument. Where in Islam, as we see in the story you mentioned of the blind man who came to the Prophet asking a question, and the Prophet was asked to give him importance, is that's not the argument Muslims make. We're making a moral argument, as opposed to an economic one.
Exactly. That there's other values besides materialistic values, is like humanitarian values, like a small h, in terms of just saving a person because he's a person, or it's also like spiritual values, and it's also, for example, these are the other values, that moral values that that Islam recognizes that the capitalist system doesn't.
That trump, if you will, economic values, and yeah, I think that's definitely a fair point, and I think I guess for how we conclude here is that this is something that I think a lot of the protesters probably do recognize, and I think this is something that we need to talk about with them. The fact that there is a deeper issue here, and that we need to have a greater conversation on the structures in which we exist and how they create our resistance to oppression.
Absolutely. In the next video, when we talk about the attack on the mosque, we'll look into this further.
Yeah, we'll delve into that a little bit. Please join us for the next video, inshallah.